So according to my phone, we're at 4 o'clock and we want to stay prompt and get started. So if you didn't have a chance to complete that survey, we will put the survey back up at about 5 o'clock. But greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Manufacturers Happy Hour. I'm Molly Burgess, and I hope that you are equipped with your favorite beverage and snacks and eager to learn. It's been a while since we Zoomed. In October, about 40 of us met at Escape Brewery in Redlands, and we learned about the brewery's manufacturing operations. That was the business side of what we did. And then we just got reacquainted with each other. Everybody seemed to have a really great time. Hadn't seen people in a long time. In November, we had a special manufacturers only event on automation, which was held at Garner Holt Industries at their Education Through Imagination facility. And then we took a vacation in December and January. So now it seems like a lot is happening, especially with the news about Russia and our concerns about fuel and transportation costs. And as we plan for the upcoming year, we do want to know what topics are of concern to manufacturers. And so that's why we had the survey up. But if you missed the survey or you have more to suggest that's not on the survey, I really invite you to email me or call me at mburgess@mfgcounselie.com with your suggestions, and particularly if you have a speaker that you'd like to hear. We will have a Q&A as we get closer to 5 o'clock, so please either put your questions in the chat or wait until that time. Just a reminder that we are recording this event and you'll be able to see it and share it after Monday afternoon when we post it. It'll be found in the video section of mfgcounselie.com. And we appreciate all of you who are supporting us by becoming a member. It's easy to join, and you'll find our membership section on our website. So we have a packed agenda today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Pearson. He's the Managing Director of Entrepreneurial Programs at the University of California, Riverside. Dr. Pearson has had a successful CEO and co-founder career in the biotech, medical device, medicinal chemistry, and consumer health businesses across the globe. His focus is on business growth and profitability. We like that. And business and corporate development, commercial operations, marketing, and international management. He'll be telling us about how data science can help you grow your business and how UC Riverside is able to help you mine and understand that data. So go ahead, David.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Molly and Wally, for asking me to join today. I had the opportunity to speak to this group a couple of months back about a new program that we're exploring at the Riverside campus, UCR, called Discover UCR. And the bottom line of that is we're trying to link resources we have available on campus, both technologies, but then also people, including student teams of interns, with the needs, better link them up with the needs of manufacturers, in particular here in the Inland Empire. So I'd like to share a few slides with you today. I promise to keep it brief. I'm very happy for follow-up. You'll see my email address on the slides, but I'll put it in the chat as well. And once again, thank you for the invitation. I did spend 35 years in the pharmaceutical world, 20 in Europe, and then 15 back over here in the United States. And I retired about 3 years ago and moved up to Idlewild, which you see behind me, and I got tired chopping wood. So I got out of the house and found UC Riverside to be a great match. And I've been working there, heading up the delivery of programs to faculty, students, and community companies that want to advance their technologies towards commercialization. So I'm going to share a couple of slides with you today. Let me make sure it's working. And full screen. How is that working for people? Okay. Yep. So We've received two large grants recently, one from the Irvine Foundation and the second one from the EDA. This particular award has a rather difficult to pronounce name called TACES. It's part of the EDA CARES Act, and it's close to $1 million that we've been granted to deliver a program which will run for the next year starting in April. And our goal is to provide technical assistance to small businesses for COVID recovery. And I know there's a lot of folks that are out there doing similar types of programs. And so what we want to do is make sure that what we deliver is complementary to all the efforts that are going on in the Inland Empire. This particular grant is going to involve direct hands-on technical assistance, essentially consulting, individual consulting for 200 technology-oriented companies, and I would expect most all of those to be manufacturers. And I'll speak in a minute to some of the topics that we're looking at. And then we're employing our team of entrepreneurs and residents to deliver counseling to teams to advance their technologies and their businesses. We have 15 experienced mentors in different verticals, including manufacturing. The topics that we have for the technical assistance, I'm going to ask a little bit of your opinion in 5 minutes or so, but we're looking at data analytics, we're looking at what sustainability means for small companies, the projected impact on operations of things like 5G and the Internet of Things, and then other technologies, augmented reality and machine learning, things that we're specialized in at the university that we think we can contribute to helping business owners here in the Inland Empire figure out how to innovate, how to be competitive even more using these types of technologies. We are partnering with organizations across the Inland Empire to make sure that we bring our services and our programming to Hispanic and Black and Brown organizations, and there'll be a number of special programs there so that what we deliver mirrors the diversity of the Inland Empire business environment. Now this is work in progress, but I mentioned earlier that we wanted to do things that are complementary. And one thing that has become very clear to me is that there are more than 250 organizations that are supporting entrepreneurism in the Inland Empire. There was a great list put together by Mike Stull and his team at CSU San Bernardino. We've been augmenting that because we found that it's very important for the people at the university to understand the role that we play and how it's complementary to many other organizations. Now, this is just a really rough draft, so if you find yourself like CMTC in one place and you think you should be someplace else, you know, these, I'll show you in a second, these are starting points for discussion. And what we're trying to show in this is we looked at the technology level of companies from lower to high tech, and then the size of the business. We've rather arbitrarily said we're not looking at solo entrepreneurs, but rather businesses that have at least one employee up to a notional 50 employees. So really in the heart of the small business environment. And the dotted line is simply to draw a line and say, okay, that's maybe where companies have 5 employees or $500,000 of revenues or more. So it's a map that allows us to say, well, where does UCR fit in this environment? And just once again, very high level, we've grouped, or I've grouped together different types of organizations, associations, and they include, you know, many people who are on this call, but the chambers of commerce, economic development groups, industry associations, of which I'd put the MCIE in there, and also recognizing the major contribution of the Inland Empire Center for Entrepreneurism, and then also the programming that we have at UC Riverside. And when you break the UC Riverside yellow circle down, I don't know how to get rid of, oh, there we go. We have a number of programs, and I'm not going to talk about them today, but they range from customer discovery, which is our Innovar program. We have on campus, we have a life science and a new agricultural technology incubator. We have the Excite Incubator, which has just moved to new facilities. That's a co-working space in downtown Riverside. We have our well-known EPIC Small Business Development Center, which counsels about 120 companies at the moment. And then we've got these two big grants, the TACES grant, which I briefly mentioned, and the Irvine Foundation grant, which is going to be supporting new agricultural technologies and logistics and clean transportation, education, workforce development. And then I've previously spoken with you about Discover UCR, linking businesses to resources on the campus. And then we have a major economic development effort with many organizations in the region about sustainable business development for the region. So I wanted to just show you those few colorful slides to say that we've been thinking about how we can complement what the other organizations are that are trying to help small business recover from COVID or thrive in the future. So our targeted impact with this particular grant is spending on the needs of the region's 5 to 50 employee revenue positive small businesses. And we've gotten some really excellent detailed databases now on approximately 120,000 companies, and we're working to whittle that down to about 5,000 target companies that will be doing a lot of outreach and service delivery to. While we've been doing this in parallel, I've been talking with business owners and including manufacturers, and found out, no surprise, that the engine of their business growth is new product development, manufacturing, and talent retention. Themes that I see are in the poll that we have today. Competitiveness for many people is based on patentable technologies, the partners that they're able to secure, and above all, speed to market. And one of the things that impacts that, of course, is the pace of change in technology. So what we'd like to do is to make sure that we bring the best that we can in technology technology consulting and services, as well as data-based insights that we can use to help manufacturers stay ahead of the pack. And once again, to unlock the assets of the university. And one of the things that we were supposed to have scheduled to have an extra speaker today from the university, and we'll have that on a future occasion. But we have a number of different groups that are looking to provide internships, student internship teams from both the engineering and business schools. So more about that in subsequent sessions. I'm not going to talk through all of the elements in here that are technology challenges for you all, for small manufacturers. It's something I think that can be a tool that we use for further discussion. I copied this from another source because I really like the quality of the graphic. But there's, of course, a broad range of issues that you all face as CEOs or heads of manufacturing. And we had to pick out, or we're working on picking out a number of those that we think we can provide high quality consulting and educational services to the community. My last slide is just really an open discussion slide, and I think we probably can, take this discussion to the end of the meeting. But basically the question is, what would be most helpful this year for you all? What can we deliver from the university as partners in the growth of the manufacturing sector here? And I realize that there's a lot of different businesses in our group, but some of you may wish to have access to consultants, general consultants, on how do I think about technology for my particular business. That's something that we can provide as part of our grant. Or you may say, well, we'd like to have specific topic consulting. I could use 8 hours of consultation with experts in the deployment of robotic systems in my small business, whether it's for storage solutions or having my employees have less physical stress on their bodies or improve efficiency. Cybersecurity, we're going to work with the Cybersecurity Institute at CSU San Bernardino, and we want to provide educational but also consulting services to help you recognize and fix security vulnerabilities and make sure that you've got the backup technology that you need. Data analytics, Molly mentioned in the start, and I'm not getting into it as much today as I'm sure many of you would like, but data and its application and its collection is just cutting across all aspects of our businesses. I'm sure you all are facing as manufacturers issues around downtime losses, how those can be predicted, forecasting of demand, data for operations efficiency and people, the processes that you have, energy consumption, a whole range of issues. where predicting the future is going to become even more critical to your profitability. And then some of the new whiz-bang data opportunities using geographic data analysis and mapping. We have a group that does that at the university that can be at your disposal as well. There is, of course, the trend of making your business more efficient by having customers serve themselves. And then I've recently been talking with people in the maker space. So question which I'm intrigued by, and I don't know what the demand would be, is for small businesses who want to try out new product concepts, would you like to have, let's say in Riverside, a facility where you can go do 3D printing and foam cutting and welding and things like that to make prototypes that you can get out and test in the marketplace? Digital marketing is certainly an issue that you're all facing. That's an area that we can provide impact or help on. And we're working with Mike Stull at the CSU San Bernardino to support a program that he's implementing now to improve the financial acumen of small business owners. And that's open to anyone in the region. And we're partnering with them to provide incentives for successful completion of that course. And then I mentioned internships. So that's what I wanted to share today in my 10 minutes. I hope that there's a few issues that you've noted down and would like to follow up with me on. I will put my email address in there. But once again, I think like Molly, and it was not set up, that outreach you just did, Molly, with the poll, asking what topics are relevant. We've got a few more that maybe you added onto that list, but I think you really have a great starting point. And we'd like to be able to deliver to you all who are facing these challenges meaningful consultative support, internships with students, and the like. And so thank you for the opportunity to address this group. And once again, jot down some notes, send them to me or send them to Molly or Wally, and I'd be very happy to follow up with you personally.
Thank you, David. I know you said you were going to put your email address in the chat. Is there a section of the website that you have that would also outline some of these opportunities that you could include?
I'm going to do it more by email right now, because this is the topics that we're going to follow for provision of services for the grant. We're still finalizing those. They are going to be around some of the themes, selected from the themes that I've mentioned. So what I'll do is I'll follow up with this group with an email of the topic areas that I've outlined, and let me know what areas of interest you have. And so it's not yet on our website from the university.
So as that develops, David, we'd love to include that information in a newsletter that would go out to the manufacturers. So
sure.
Think about using that opportunity as well. But we thank you so much for being here today. Mm-hmm. So we know, moving on, we know that manufacturers are constantly dealing with new regulations and rules, whether it's OSHA or Cal OSHA or your local utility company or government. There's something to learn. And that's why we invited California Manufacturers and Technology Association to join us today. And I'd like to invite Rob Spiegel, Senior Policy Director for CMTA, to unmute and tell us what's most important to be aware of. Rob?
Great. Thank you, Molly, and thank you, Wally, and definitely appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I'm pretty new to the organization. As I was telling Molly and the folks who were on early, I've been with CMTA since October of last year. So I think that's a little over 4 months. I've had the opportunity, though, to work alongside CMTA for the better part of my career as what we call in third house, or as in government affairs. I've come to CMTA with 17 years of experience through the U.S. Congress as well as the state legislature. Finishing up 5 years as a policy director for the California Farm Bureau Federation and natural resource energy issues, and you name it. But before I wanted to get really into everything and what I'm talking about, I know is in our previous discussions and getting this all set up that there was a lot of commentary and concern over the Cal OSHA standards specifically, and I'm happy to work with Mr. Lawrence Gaden on our team at CMTA, who's been with the organization since I think late 2019, but has really been the point person for our organization and for many of our members in kind of understanding the dynamics associated to Cal OSHA, the COVID-19 requirements, the overlapping requirements from the federal government, et cetera. And I did want to turn it over to Lawrence first and have him start to go through that and give him an opportunity to showcase some of his abilities and understanding a dynamic with OSHA and industrial regulation, which just blows my mind. But Lawrence, I'm happy to turn it over to you, and then I'll go through more of the bills and legislation and other stuff, as well as you can talk about our priority bill for the year, if that works for you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Robert. Just to kind of give a little context, like I said, we've been engaged in the OSHA journey, I'll call it, for since these standards has been out. But I've taken over that role for the remainder of about a year or so, a little bit over a year or so. And it has been a journey, as you've seen, really kind of ebbed and flowed in this pandemic process and kind of what the regulatory landscape would look like. So I've prepared a little document kind of touching on some high level points of what we've seen and what we're expecting to see in the OSHA process. So whenever you're ready to share that, I can kind of go through and detail some of the points within that document. Yeah, so first, for a little bit of context, the federal OSHA withdrew their emergency temporary standards in January after some pretty lengthy court battles. What that ETS would have done federally would have mandated vaccinations for employers with more than 100 employees. Cal OSHA, despite the feds withdrawing their ETS, made its second readoption of its own ETS in January as well. And instead of taking, the text from the federal one, including the vax mandate, they instead took some guidance from CDPH into the text, but it did not include that vax mandate. So just some notable changes that were included within that text that was adopted in January. Asymptomatic positive cases must be excluded from workplace at least 5 days, but it can return earlier if they test negative. On day 5, if symptoms persist, their isolation must continue until they're resolved. Unvaccinated employees or vaccinated close contact employees must be excluded for 10 days unless asymptomatic or they receive a negative test at day 5. 2-shot vaccinated employees who are due or eligible for a booster and asymptomatic can continue to work, but must be tested within that 3 to 5 day range after a close contact. And also fully boosted employees or those who are not yet eligible for a booster but receive 2 shots, who have a close contact can return to work immediately if they are asymptomatic, but still need to get tested up to 5 days after their initial exposure. So a lot of those pieces within that text that's been effective since January are set to expire in April. So next month, the next OSHA meeting will be held on March 17th. Permanent regulations will be voted on in that March meeting and will be needed to be adopted within April. And a huge part of that March meeting that we are waiting to see from our manufacturing side, and we'll try to address in the last meeting last week actually, is the part of the text including exclusion pay. We tried to address that, so we've seen some kind of duplicative exclusion pay requirements. So that's something that we tried to address. And in the ETS, the Cal OSHA ETS, I'm just going to go over some of the. You want to see my handsome face, David? Thank you. In the exclusion pay requirements for employers in the ETS, just going over a little bit of the requirements. It's required for employees if they're excluded from the workplace from exposure to COVID-19. There's some kind of mitigating factors there as well. Employers cannot require employees to use that paid sick leave provided to employees under Labor Code Section 246. So that was something unique as well. There's no cap on the total amount of exclusion pay that may be required. An employee is entitled to their regular rate of pay for the pay period in which the employee is excluded. So there's a lot of kind of the FAQs that the Labor Commissioner released kind of goes over a lot of the mitigating factors and scenarios in which these kind of shift. But that is the way it stands now. And so SB 114, part of the early action budget items from the governor, took effect on February 19th. So that, it goes effective 19th, and applies retroactively to January 1st and will be in effect through September 30th of this year. So that's replacing the COVID supplemental paid sick leave that expired in this past September. It's kind of a very nuanced leave. There's a carve out for businesses with less than 26 employees or 25 or less employees. There will be 2 buckets of leave within that available. Bucket 1 is pretty similar to what we saw last year with the last year's SB 95's sick pay, supplemental sick pay leave, with a few exceptions, kind of varying with quarantine and isolation periods, and they're following those CDPH guidelines as well. And then the second bucket is for a positive test for an employee or a family member or a person with whom they're providing care for that employee test positive. An employer may require documentation of that positive test for an employee or a family member, and there is no leave available if the employee refuses to show documentation or refuses to test. So, yeah, I think that's what we're looking for really in that March meeting, is to try to get the duplicative aspect of that leave removed within the permanent regulation. So I think that's kind of the biggest piece of what we're looking at in next month in March. Once this leave expires, the legislature could vote to extend it again for another year. No word on if that will happen. I assume it's pretty unlikely, but that is an option as well. The requirement to provide that 10 days covers the longest possible COVID exclusion under CDPH order. And we kind of have some problems with that because it ignores some CDPH guidance as well for that updated recommendation of 5 days. And like I said, just pretty duplicative measure as well. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. I can kind of dive into a lot of the nuance of this. I've included some of the FAQs from the labor commissioner. It gets a little, I wouldn't say sticky, but it gets a little kind of nuanced, kind of per the scenario of what you're looking at for the employer. But yeah, we have some, with the new COVID supplemental paid sick leave in place, and we're definitely looking to get the exclusion pay aspect resolved within within the OSHA and the ETS. And as we see, we're reaching this kind of endemic stage. A lot of the with the mask requirements being lifted as well. Employers are still facing those requirements, but that'll be one kind of piece we're looking at to ease the overall cost and burden that employers are going through with this ETS saga. So I'm happy to take any questions, or if we want to kind of kick those to the end or pass it on to Robert, who will touch a little bit on our more legislative end, and I'll bookend it with our big priority this year as well.
Cool. Yeah, Lawrence, I'll just take it from there and appreciate you being able to join us, because as it stands, the Cal OSHA and the Emergency Temporary Standards, or ETS, have been a host of problems for not only manufacturers, but a lot in the business community for the better part of 2 years. And as I've said before, and I know Lance has said too, as we're emerging now, as to how do we restructure manufacturing and the business community to kind of this post-COVID environment, and trying to find mechanisms there in which businesses can continue to thrive, as well as the shortages that we still see in employees and the supply chain related challenges there. So we're not out of the woods yet. It's good to see that the numbers associated to COVID have definitely fallen, at least for Northern California and Sacramento in particular. But there's still challenges, I think, that exist there, whether it's kind of the duplicative nature of the OSHA regs to the federal requirements, or just the constant battle that we see brewing in the legislature associated to mandated vaccinations for employees, et cetera, which we're still seeing play out in kind of the legislative sphere, and have yet to really be determined at this point, but we do know they're out there and that they exist. But Vincent, if you could, I'll happy to start on the PowerPoint and go from there. And thank you for running that, by the way, for us. So again, appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you, and for both myself and Lawrence, feel free at any time if you have questions on particular legislation or regulation, even if it's not Cal OSHA, feel free to contact us. We're happy to get you in touch with the rate individual for CMTA. My specific, portfolio of goods, if you will, for the organization is primarily the natural resources and energy space. For much of my career, I've been in that sector. I've also done tax policy, I've done transportation, I've done, you name it, I've pretty much done it. Although every time I try to distance myself a little bit from resources, water and energy, I always get brought back in to do it somewhere else. So I'm happy to be here. Our contact information is provided. And just real quickly, we can go to the next slide, Vincent. Just some little bit of data as to what California manufacturing provides to the state. This is kind of my segue into Lawrence talking about our priority bill for the year. Is California is home to about 30,000 manufacturers. We have about 1.3 million employees, and definitely appreciate the partnership that we've had with CMTC in providing those resources for California manufacturers. It's a super critical service that we absolutely value, and happy to have partnered with them in many of the different endeavors. We have about a $300 billion economy associated to California manufacturing, and most of it is what people don't understand, and that it's taken me a little bit to further understand what it is CMTA and our membership and manufacturing community has, is a good majority, more than almost 2/3 of California manufacturing are from folks who are considered small, meaning 25 employees or less. At the same time, we're one of the most diverse and sectors of California's economy in both minorities and communities of color, but also with women in the workplace. But for those reasons, California is still also a very challenging environment to do business. I know we've all heard of the concepts associated to the California exodus and companies leaving. And at a time, maybe that is true. And we take a hard look at those regulations and legislation as it relates to the opportunity for employers of all kinds, whether you're a manufacturer or business, and how you adapt to those challenges of the regulatory nature, or even the legislative nature of what we end up as business and community members and having to address. But in response to some of these challenges, CMTA, through our work with Caltax and some other organizations, have brought forward legislation this year to kind of level the playing field. And Lawrence, I'll turn it over to you now, but we are introducing for, I think, one of the very few offensive strategies that we have as an organization, as a mechanism to further ensure manufacturing success here in California. And Lawrence, I'll turn it over to you, sir, to talk about our priority bill.
Yes, and as Robert mentioned, we've been working really alongside Caltax and Assemblymember Grayson, Tim Grayson's office, for AB 1951, known as the Manufacturers Attraction and Development Exemption. So what that would be is the AB 1951 would provide a full state and local sales tax exemption for the purchase or lease of manufacturing equipment. This broad exemption we're looking at, we're really trying to transform what we've seen with the current kind of nearly applied exemption, and really try to push and bolster some investment in production and attract new manufacturing jobs. As you guys all know, California has a 15% higher tax burden than most states, and really are kind of at the top of local and state sales tax. We think by expanding the current exemption, we can increase some of our domestic cost competitiveness and really kind of reach a tipping point for capital investment, especially in this crucial time. We kind of have this window where we have a lot of opportunity. We have the funds really statewide to kind of make this happen. It's something that 38 states already have full exemption on manufacturing equipment. So we're really kind of behind the game. And it's, like I mentioned, California has the highest state sales tax rate. One important piece of this bill that we've tried to do in making it a complete one, we understand that some local cities and counties will lose some revenue dollars or have the potential to. So within this bill, we wrote in a really important backfill provision that allows the legislature to offset any local sales tax dollars lost due to the exemption, try to keep the counties and local governments whole. And we think that's really important. I mean, because we're in the bill, we're set at a kind of 5-year sunset. And, we have what we've seen is a windfall for the next few years at least, and potentially up to the next 5. So I think it's a kind of a crucial time where we can make it so we can get this exemption, kind of push production in the state, and also keep our local governments whole. The MADE, the MADE, like I said, we really want to push that to kind of help manufacturers of all sizes compete really in this economy, and kind of cut down on some of the operational costs and burdens, and really push some new growth for innovation within the state. So yeah, AB 1951, Assemblymember Grayson. We have 11 co-authors on the bill as well. We don't want to read them all out. We have a really, really kind of strong base of folks supporting this bill. It's become a priority for the new Dems, top priority for the new Dems as well in this session. So yeah, a full and complete state and local sales tax exemption for manufacturers pushing production. That's a big and the biggest one for us this year, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Lawrence. And yeah, one of the talking points that I've had a couple times at various venues for our organization is we always talk about California being the hub of that innovation, which is great and it's fine. But it matters little if we keep exporting that innovation to be produced elsewhere. And it's something that we as manufacturers definitely need to capitalize on and make this a much more inclusive environment for manufacturers in the state to utilize that information as part of the operations that we all run. So we can go to the next slide, Vince, and I can talk on or speak to some of the regulatory things. So I hope that everyone is at least familiar with who CMTA is and what we do. We represent about 400 different manufacturers in the state on matters associated with legislation and regulation to kind of, as I call it, equal the playing field and address some of those circumstances that really make it difficult for manufacturers in the state. And part of what I've done in my short time with the organization is get us to a point of balancing a lot of the competing interests that we see at the various regulatory boards. It's not to say that it hadn't been done before, but a much more aggressive strategy in dealing specifically with some regulations that directly impact membership associated to CMTA and much more broadly to the 30,000 manufacturing businesses across the state. And obviously you can't go too far in California without talking about the impacts associated to CARB or the California Air Resources Board. And one of the major, I guess, regulatory undertakings, and it's not exactly a regulation, but it's more of like it's called the 2022 scoping plan update. And really what the scoping plan provides is really an assessment of how California intends to achieve emission reduction targets associated to any number of the legislative or executive orders that have been promulgated by the legislature or the governor. And this extends far back to even Governor Schwarzenegger. And some of these include, I'm sure you've all heard of probably Senate Bill 32 or SB 32, which established a 40% reduction in emission levels by 2030. And also the scoping plan is going to set a chart to identify how the state will arguably meet a goal of carbon neutrality by the year 2045. The reason the scoping plan presents such a challenge for manufacturers and business is because the statute has charted a trajectory and how that trajectory is achieved is kind of the unknown. And let me kind of explain with an example of what we've kind of been dealing with in the scoping plan. So as the process moves forward at CARB, which will be set for adoption probably fourth quarter of this year, so November, I believe, is when it's expected to be voted on. It provides a series of alternatives as to how California will meet these goals. The first alternative is essentially the complete elimination and phase out of all combustion or fossil fuel related industries. So if you use natural gas, we're sorry, there's essentially no place left for you in the state of California. There's a limited reliance on technologies that we call engineered carbon removal or carbon capture and storage, carbon capture utilization and storage technologies. And there's restricted applications associated like biomass generation and energy. The other alternative is like a full suite of kind of these technological innovations, engineered carbon resources and removal. You get into like alternatives 3 and 4. And I know I'm getting into a little weeds, but with these alternatives, it's more of the status quo in that we're not making as a state following the commitments and the regulatory or statutory guidance associated to how we achieve these emission reduction target goals. Funny thing is there's nothing that really harms California other than human health issues associated to what happens if California misses the goal. If we miss like a safety provision associated to an operation, we get fined by Cal OSHA and others. If California misses these goals, the funny thing is it's not really much happens. We just missed the goal, we missed the target. But the scoping plan is significant because it also impacts how we as manufacturers or we in the business community are able then to pivot and adapt to those other regulations that kind of formulate the real cohesive strategy of the scoping plan. These could be things like the locomotive rule or the zero emission vehicle executive order in 7920, or even advanced clean fleets or zero emission forklift or the bus and truck rule or any of these other suite of goods. But it's also how do we meet these other statutory requirements, SB 1383 on short-lived climate pollutants, how do SB 100 decarbonizing energy by the year 2045 to 100% carbon free. how do we extend the very successful cap and trade program associated to AB 398? I could go on and on and on. My point is the scoping plan is a really complex endeavor for CARB, but in not engaging in it, business and industry faces a reality of where you might be harmed to the extent where you just have to leave California. And that is why CMTA and others have taken such an aggressive strategy in kind of providing an alternative, the reasonable scenario for CARB as to how do we still meet these goals while also simultaneously keeping the pace as the world's 5th largest economy. Associated to this as well, I did mention just very briefly a locomotive rule. I know California Steel is on, and we were happy to work with them and several of our other members in representing some kind of bringing forth some comments to CARB to talk about the real difficulties with zero emission or electric locomotives in California on behalf of business. Now, what's really interesting about this reg was, unlike the other regulations that we've seen in the transportation sector from CARB, this one essentially created an opportunity for the Air Resources Board to act as kind of like I'm trying to think of the word, like an economic bank, in which they were making a determination and essentially holding the escrow account for a company to make their investments in procurement of zero emission trains or locomotives to meet the obligations associated to this reg. A new locomotive, electric locomotive, is about $5 million, give or take. And in no other regulation, even if you were replacing, let's say, a truck fleet of 50 vehicles, has CARB ever promulgated a regulation in which they were going to oversee the financial obligations of a company to meet a regulatory requirement. For these reasons and many others, CMTA and our membership have pushed back against CARB, and again submitted some comments earlier this week. I'm always happy to share those with anybody on this call. I do want to make sure that people are aware of these type of things because they are impactful. We don't have, obviously, at CMTA many members within the locomotive space, but there are enough. And these are operations that only have, 3 to 5. But even with that, a business should be left, or a manufacturer in particular, should be left to their own devices of how they meet the objective of that regulation, not be forced into providing about $1 million annually for one of our companies to establish an escrow account, which is then prohibited from being utilized for any other part of your operation. Associated to this as well, I mentioned the executive order in 7920, which is the zero emission vehicle. That is running through every regulation that you can possibly think of at the Air Resources Board, whether it's locomotive, whether it's scoping plan, advanced clean fleet, advanced clean cars, transportation refrigeration units, all of these other ones that are ongoing. The ZEV executive order is really, I think, the driver behind all of these new regulatory developments that we're seeing at the entity. Another couple things just to put on everybody's radar too. Advanced clean fleets, happy to talk more about that offline with folks. If you are essentially a business or entity with $50 million or more in gross annual revenue, or operate 50 or more vehicles at a gross weight of over 8,500 pounds, so these are kind of your larger pickups, your box trucks, etc., you're going to fall under the advanced clean fleet regulation. There's also a new one. We just have received the draft regulation as of Tuesday on zero emission forklift. If you operate forklifts as part of any of your manufacturing operations now in California, by 2026, you better be ready to replace that with a zero emission alternative. That's what we know thus far. I haven't yet had the opportunity to read it, but it's, again, one of these drivers that is increasing costs and limiting productivity for California's manufacturing entities. Along with that, we also have ongoing rulemakings at the CPUC. CMTA does contract for legal counsel to participate in those hearings. While I track it, I'm usually not asked to be an expert witness in San Francisco at the hearings, but I've always appreciated the opportunity to do it. I believe the MCIE was part of a letter that we had submitted on decarbonization to the PUC back in December. The decarbonization rulemaking is following a whole suite of actions here in California about how the state limits and mitigates for the emissions, not only from vehicles, not only from electricity, but also to the very brick and mortar of how it is we design buildings and how it is we are able to continue to decarbonize our operation. This could be things such as switching out natural gas furnaces for some electric option, which to my knowledge doesn't exist too much anywhere. But those type of things, as well as like LED lights and various things of that nature. The decarbonization rulemaking, though, CMTA took on as a part of 27 different business entities to really push back against the CPUC to say functionally, there are industries and components of California's economy that cannot decarbonize. And if you're going to modify the extensions, the rulemakings, the allowances associated to how an industry is going to effectuate its outcome and its production and capabilities in the state, that's going to be really problematic, and it's going to increase costs, both from a ratepayer perspective and both from a manufacturing perspective on our community. Other businesses included associated to that, the California Restaurants Association, California Business Roundtable, a whole slew of other actors who are also saying this is a really bad venue and avenue for the Public Utilities Commission to undertake right now. Another one just to put on there, obviously Wally and I talked about this, the affordability of electrical rates. Get ready, ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching 30% above market value for energy rates in California, and it's only going to get worse. I don't mean that to kind of be tongue in cheek, but our rates in California are absolutely absurd. If you are a heavy industry, if you're a manufacturer, if you're a commercial business enterprise, the movement towards full electrification of California's economy is only going to dramatically increase utility rates. At the same time, we have none of the transmission, nor any of the distribution, or none of the supply in state to be able to meet the demands associated to the clean energy or the zero electric vehicle, whether it's the home, whether it's the business, whether it's the car, whether it's the choo-choo, it doesn't matter. It is going to be an astronomical, or what I heard today, I think was a Herculean effort to be able to do so. And at the same time, there is still a requirement, though, that a utility has an obligation to serve a customer. So if Vincent wanted to run for his kitchen a natural gas line to operate a stove, the utility would be required to do that. Unfortunately, Vincent would have to pay for all of the costs associated to how he gets natural gas to his kitchen. The only other thing really to flag very quickly, we're engaged in a hexavalent chromium or chrome 6 issue. It's a water quality issue, CMTA, well before I was even, I think, a lobbyist or in government affairs, and I was working for the legislature. We filed a suit on against, at the time, the Department of Public Health. Department of Public Health, up until a few years ago, was kind of the operator of how California would set standards associated to water quality and MC maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs. We filed suit because the Chrome 6 regulation at the time would have added about $4 billion in costs. So now that the Water Board has had about 5 years to examine it, they're coming back with a new proposal to raise costs on a hexavalent chromium standard that may exceed $25 billion. So more to come on that. We haven't yet seen the reg, but we do know that that's what they're intending to do. So we can go to the next slide, Vincent, and I'll quickly go through some legislation that we have and kind of a legislative update, and then happy to turn it over for Q&A. We have some new challenges in the legislature. This is going to be the first cycle in which the legislature is having to deal with new maps for their districts. In 2021, the California Citizens Redistricting Commission issued new maps that have spurred a whole slew of various departures from members of the legislature. Currently 20 have left, or currently 20 have notified folks that they don't intend to seek re-election for their district, and 5 have already vacated their seats. As Lawrence has said as well, I mean, we face as an organization, an industry of business and manufacturing of almost 5,000 bills annually. We have a total this year and last year of about 4,500 introduced. We had the bill deadline last Friday, and we have about 2,100 and change that were introduced that we're still kind of combing through to understand the various impacts to California businesses and manufacturers. And then next slide. Perfect. And some of these that we can talk about as well, we already heard about 1951. These are just some that we have recently gone to our board to seek approval and moving forward with a particular position. Some of these, obviously, AB 1951, you've heard Lawrence talk about. That's our priority bill. It's obviously a CMTA support or sponsored piece of legislation. AB 1001 was what we call a holdover bill from last year. that moved in January. This one is an expansion to the CEQA process, which would include the environmental justice considerations, which aren't technically environmental considerations. They're more of kind of a social equity and social justice construct. Those would have to be mitigated for and provided for as part of AB 1001. AB 1694 is a new one. If any of you have had challenges in the insurance space, especially due to the fires in this state, homeowners and businesses alike, there is a new bill out there from Assemblymember Levine, who represents Marin County up in the North Bay, that would allow the California Insurance Commissioner to prohibit or restrict insurance coverage for any fossil fuel related company and project. I wanted to highlight something here for everyone, that when you think fossil fuel, we're not talking about Exxon, Marathon, Phillips 66, or anything like that. It's not defined, which has led our members to believe that it could be any company that utilizes a fossil fuel associated to their business. So if you're a restaurant, if you're a manufacturer, if you're anything along those lines, you have the opportunity to essentially lose your insurance coverage associated with this bill. For that reason, we have gone to full oppose as of this afternoon. Another CEQA bill, just for folks to know of, AB 1749. CMTA, along with some of our other colleagues, are going to end up opposing this bill as well. It essentially creates a de facto ban on any development in California. If there is an impact to a disadvantaged community in terms of air quality or water quality in a cumulative sense, a project will be not allowed to move forward. Obviously, I don't think I need to speak to everybody about how problematic that is, but it's a bill that creates significant problems, of course. Some of you in the battery or battery embedded products, so if consider a electric toothbrush or an electric razor, for at least the 5th year in a row now, we're going to be fighting another battery and battery embedded product recycling bill. While we are not opposed to recycling and extended producer responsibilities or EPR, there's also a role in which, if we are establishing these programs, CalRecycle and others shouldn't really have a say in how we do it. What's been really funny about this debate for the past at least 5 years is CalRecycle has been the agency that's supposed to be encouraging recycling of all products within the state of California. And it just so happens that they tend to not be able to figure out how batteries can stop ending up in our landfills. For that reason, California manufacturers are going to be forced to establish a program, and at least in the last iteration of the bill, establish 5,000 potential take-back sites with costs of unknown proportions on manufacturers and industries to be able to staff and provide a venue for Californians to recycle batteries without knowing how really to do it. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. Just a couple other ones to talk about, and then we can finish up. We always have the various engagements associated to cap and trade and other emission programs. We are seeing an introduction of a carbon tax in California this year. At this time, it's not really substantive, but there is a vehicle to do so. We also have a climate corporate accountability reporting mechanism for all companies over $1 billion. Now, if you happen to be like an Amazon, but you use individual suppliers to say, logistically run your deliveries, simply because Amazon is over a $1 billion company, everyone associated to your supply chain would also have to report on what we call scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions, to tell you how ridiculous this is essentially the emissions associated to your employees going from their home to your work. So that sounds like a really great idea for California. In addition, we do have SB 983, which is a right to repair legislation. That gets into the real messy world of intellectual property rights and R&D development associated to our manufacturers. And then to round things off here at the very end, we can't forget about the ports and the congestion of our supply chain. We have 2 bills that I know that we're looking at in depth from Assemblymember Fong, who's from the Bakersfield area, both of which would in theory, we hope, alleviate some of the strains and the problems associated to California's ports, as well as provide some avenue and flexibility for supply chains moving forward. And then, as per usual, we have other decarbonization bills that I don't need to get into, as well as budget augmentations and budget requests. If you think our $40 billion surplus is great, wait until we're about $67 billion, which is likely where we're projected to be by this time in June. So Molly, I'll stop there. I'm happy to field any questions. Same with Lawrence. Again, very much appreciate the opportunity to address you guys and happy to do so again in the future.
We did have a question from Steve Harrington. Steve, you want to ask your question or shall I read it? Came through our chat.
No,
Go
I was
ahead.
just, I haven't really followed CMTA, and I was just curious about what is obviously from a policy perspective, quite substantive. And by the way, I'm blown away by all of this legislation that's out there. It's off the charts. No wonder it's so difficult for manufacturers to do business in the state. But, with that said, does CMTA have any involvement in workforce development initiatives, or kind of what's the position of CMTA in that realm?
Lawrence, I'll turn it to you, my friend. You're
Yeah, we
familiar
have
with this.
there's an entire kind of wing of our staff that's kind of focused on training and securing training funds. They also help a lot of manufacturers with kind of the administrative and compliance aspects, securing securing certifications. It's tough to say. CMTA also helps develop some apprenticeship programs. Yeah, we're kind of all have our hands in all phases of the workforce development process for sure. But yeah, definitely, I mean, and that's kind of one of our biggest kind of side of one of our associations is the training part. We definitely try to secure a lot of funds to help manufacturers train their workers and help, build a skilled workforce going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm happy to connect with you offline too and get you in touch with our particular program leads on that and talk about some of the opportunities that exist for California manufacturers. I don't want to make it a sales pitch today for anyone necessarily, but I'm happy to connect you individually, and Molly or Vincent or Wally could connect us. I'd be happy to put you in touch with our folks to do so.
Thank you.
Absolutely, sir.
Other questions out there?
This is David. Thank you for a really eye-opening presentation. Are there specifically, do you have contacts or do you work with people at UC Riverside regarding the legislative agenda?
So it depends. From time to time, there could be, they have representation here in California on behalf of like the UC regions, of course, David, as you know. And at times it makes it sometimes challenging, but where there has been a lot of commonality is with STEM curriculum and providing essentially pathways for students affiliated to any of the UCs or CSUs to work in a manufacturing, venue, which is something that we're looking at as an organization, and me personally, I'm trying to expand that type of availability. We're looking at some legislation earlier this year on, very high level, but I'll share with all of you. Still needs to be fleshed out, but for students affiliated to a CSU or UC, a UC program, and wanting to be like part of the STEM curriculum. So an engineer, a manufacturer, chemical, electrical, it doesn't matter, but wanting to enter into like a manufacturing space of receiving essentially like a personal income tax credit for continuing to reside here in California to move forward with their career and technological innovation associated with that company, as well as looking at kind of the manufacturer side too of some benefits there to hire California residents in meeting some of the staffing needs and requirements associated with their operations. I don't want to speak too much out of turn without obviously talking to Lance about some of the other things, who's our president and CEO, but there's always an avenue there and a venue that I definitely would like to explore more with not only CMTA, but also with our partners in kind of the STEM research and UC CSU space, if that helps at all, but happy to connect offline too.
Yeah, I'd like to do that because there's been in the last 2 or 3 years, I think a real awakening particularly on the Riverside campus about its role in economic development.
Absolutely.
We have, of course, the headquarters of CARB now in Riverside. And
can I say I'm sorry that you do? I mean, it's a great looking building, but.
Well, I'm happy because it's already brought 400 new jobs in.
There we go.
And it's attracted half a dozen other companies to move to Riverside and create jobs, which we're very short on.
Phenomenal.
So it's a spark, and it's also mirrored by the Center for Environmental Research Technology, or CSERT, which is at the university, which is essentially a copy. Basically, we've been working with CARB for a number of years, and we've developed a lot of air quality and clean transportation initiatives in collaboration with them. But the reason I'm just really excited about what I've heard from you, despite how dark it is that there are a number of people at the university who feel that we need to proactively, work on programs at the university that help our companies, our regional initiatives address these things for the benefit of the people who live here. So
Absolutely.
really, I'll follow up with you, but I want to, if possible, invite you and Lawrence to give a presentation to a bunch of the senior people at the university about this aspect. It's a non-traditional thing. Economic development has been a bit of an afterthought after education and students and the like, but our future is wrapped in these issues that you're raising. So
Yeah.
thank you.
No, happy to do so. In my previous post, I always did a lot of it with San Luis Obispo or Cal Poly, also Sonoma State and some of the other ones as well. But happy to do so. Always appreciate the opportunity to address. And I make fun of CARB quite a bit because I've had to work with them for so long, but they are great collaborators with us in our industry, and especially being able to address some of the challenges that we face. Part of the reason I told Wally this of why I was excited to join CMTA is that the challenges that we face in manufacturing are so unique that oftentimes, unless you have someone in our member companies or otherwise being able to address that directly with the regulators, or even in an educational standpoint as part of like a UC or CSU program, is a lot of the time it's just simply misunderstood. And with that, there comes a lot of time and collaboration as well as education that we provide at CMTA to the broader community as well, and being able to provide some of those, as I call them, industry-driven success and industry-driven solutions that are beneficial to the operations that we have in the state.
Rob, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your website. You were talking about the legislative update, and I think that's a section on your website. And you used to have like pro and con section. I don't know, opposed is what you said today. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
No, I have always worked in, we are a organization that represents the interests of manufacturers across the state. Whether you are a member of CMTA or one of the 29,600 that are not. Now, I operate very transparently. And if we oppose and dislike your bill, there is no pro or con with it. We oppose your bill because it's a bad bill on behalf of the manufacturers we represent. There might be some pro arguments that you want to throw in there, and there always are. But from our perspective and protecting the interests of our membership and others, to me, it's always been black and white. I will always go, as Lawrence will too, to our membership to get the best advice possible on things such as like, right to repair. As to, is there any middle ground associated to how a manufacturer or how industry can kind of meet a member or meet, I hate to say meet the moment associated to this legislation, to find kind of that middle ground. But there are pros, we weigh pros and cons of both arguments under the notion, though, that we also represent the members of our organization and others that may be, impacted quite substantially by some of the proposals that are provided. Lawrence, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in at all, but.
Yeah, and I think we do have one distinction of if a good chunk of our membership really agrees on a con, or if they really hate a bill, it could get elevated to what we call, a breaker, a manufacturing breaker, something that kind of spreads across the industry. So we have the manufacturing maker and breaker distinction. I don't know if that's what you're referencing. If it's a really good bill, like AB 1951, that will help our entire industry, it is a manufacturing maker. That's green. So yeah, and it's something that is just kind of flat out bad for the industry, gets that nice special designation that I'm sure legislators love to see.
And so is that on your website under legislative update?
Yes, it should be. I'll make sure if it's not, I'll make sure we get that all updated. But yeah, it should be. We're still kind of fielding this year's legislation, obviously going through, what deserves those distinctions. So we'll have some more updates too as we kind of go through this session.
I noticed that Wally Brittany has his hand up.
Yes, regarding that AB 1951 sales and use tax exemption. Just curious, we've lived without that exemption since the Jerry Brown days. He eliminated the enterprise zones and some of the other things that incorporated that sort of thing. What in your experience with your manufacturers now, granted, it's a direct reduction of the cost of acquisition of machinery, okay, but one question is, did you have a resounding wish from your board or some group that says, boy, we really need that to stay competitive? Now, if that, and then I have a different question after that. So.
To kind of address that, I would say yes. I think amongst a large group of manufacturers, there has been a resistance, to infuse capital into California for a myriad of reasons, including just the larger operational cost. And if this, and we believe will serve as a kind of way to lower those costs and mitigate some of those operational expenses, I think, all of our membership is supporting it and on board with it. So to answer your question, short form, yes.
Okay. Then regarding are there any, in that AB 1951, it exempts extraction industry, I believe, which that could be cement manufacturing, which is really big in the Inland Empire or in the Riverside and San Bernardino counties. There are about 6 cement manufacturing plants in the 2 counties, mostly in the high desert, what we call the high desert area. And so is, and I tried to read that. It's been a while since I read it, but it looks like they would not benefit from that AB 1951. Is there a pushback on that kind of industry that they from? There was a few years ago. Again, we had one of the state officials speak to one of our our summits, and he said, "Well, that's extraction, and that doesn't count, And yet, it's like a manufacturer. I mean, making of cement is a manufacturing process from rock, and so I'm just curious, how tight is that, or how it looked to me like you're not going to make them eligible for the tax exemption. So or that bill, that's the way I read it, but very quickly. So I don't want to.
If you fit under the NAICS code or NAICS definition of a manufacturer or manufacturing, you are included in the bill. That kind of a short form answer your question.
I see. So you go to the NAICS or whatever I see, and that code will tell you whether you're in there or not. Okay.
NAICS and the SIC code as well.
Yeah, and Wally, just real quickly too, having been a part of the rev and tax kind of battles over the last decade, the extraction equipment that you see is being excluded from, I guess it'd probably be qualified tangible personal property or business personal property, I think is what it is. That's already an existing law. We're not changing that. The specific components that we have to it have nothing to do with extraction per se, other than what is already listed there as potentially being not included under what is already provided under California law and mandate, if that helps clarify anything.
Sort of, yeah. Thank you.
Rob, do you have some events coming up?
Oh, geez. I think I'm at the PUC virtually Monday, Tuesday. I don't know. One of those days. I'll have the one that I just did was for the National Association of Manufacturers about a week and a half ago on taxation issues, the decarbonization issues, some of the other broader, what was the other topic? It was taxation, decarbonization, and one other one, which I can't remember, and had a lot of fun doing it. It's been, like I said, I've been really busy since I've come on board, and I know Lawrence has as well, but it's been a great adventure for the 4.5 months that I've been here. So with CMTA.
Yeah, I'll just add, as we look towards our reopening, we'll definitely have a lot of stuff popping up in Sacramento and on L Street. You guys are around, so.
Yeah, if you're ever in Sacramento now after Monday the 28th, come stop by, say hello. We'll be open and ready to hang out in our office. It'll be fun. The tide is turning, so to speak, with I think a lot of events. I know that as an organization, we will be hosting a couple fundraisers. I think that first week that we're open, now that everything's opened up in Sacramento and there's a willingness for people to go out and meet people again face to face, mask or no mask. It's definitely back to the environment, I hope, of the way things used to be. So
Well, that sounds great, Lawrence and Rob. We thank you so much for your time spent here today and the research you put into it. We always love hearing about what's going on. And so thank you for being here. I wanted just to remind you that we put the survey back up if you didn't have a chance to take it before. And please visit our website for information on future events that we'll be having, membership to see our videos of this meeting and other meetings that you might have missed, and also our career development videos for youth. So thank you everybody for being here today, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And you can hang around and ask more questions if you want to. But I'm going to let you go if you need to go.